The stupider we can make them look, the better. They kept getting stranger, and I thought maybe a little more X-rated as the week went on. Hi, and welcome to The Curling Show, the podcast that brings you interviews with the sport's top athletes and the people who shape the game. I'm Dean Gemmel, and in this edition, we talk to Rick Patzke, Chief Operating Officer of the United States Curling Association, as we look for a bit more understanding of how well the game is growing in the States. And remember, merchandise from The Curling Show is still available. Click on the decidedly understated link to The Curling Show store in the sidebar at thecurlingshow.com. Even if you don't buy anything, the product descriptions might make you smile just a bit. The man described as a communications dynamo during the 2006 Olympics, and now the Chief Operating Officer of the United States Curling Association. Rick Patzke, welcome to The Curling Show.
Thank you, Dean. Great to be with you today.
Hey, first of all, I do want to congratulate you on what I thought was a great job generating buzz for the sport during the last Olympic Games. We've all seen curling organizations mishandle media relations plenty of times, but you and your team seemed really on top of it. Honestly, I was a bit surprised by the amount of coverage and the level of interest. Were you?
Well, we had a very good team, as you mentioned there, Dean, and beyond that, we had two very good curling teams to work with who were media-friendly and telegenic, and I had good stories behind them. So in some senses, I think we might have been a little bit too successful, and I don't know if that affected performance in the long run, but it's something we'll look at as far as being maybe a little too invasive in training time and things for some of our teams.
You know, it's an interesting point because that was actually my follow-up question. Was I thought the only negative I saw come out of it was I did feel that Cassie Johnson's team may have felt the heat a little bit, especially as the games approach, and it did seem to impact them. And you're saying that's something in the future you're going to look at?
Yeah, and this is my opinion whether or not that actually affected them, because I haven't had enough time to sit down with Cassie's team and really do a debriefing on the media side. But we tried to manage it and steer it away from them, especially as we got closer to December and January. And unfortunately, that's also the time that a lot of the media is making their plans for an Olympic Games. So at times I think we had a little too much pressure and we turned some people away.
You know, and I think it might have something to do with personality of each team. I mean, that was a young team, and you know, with a different team, it might be a different story.
You're right on that, too. Every team's going to be different. It was a younger team and a first time for this amount of intense focus, so I'm sure they learned some things as well.
Yeah, I think we have 20,000 curlers, give or take, here in the U.S., compared to, say, more than 1 million in Canada. But I almost guess right now demand might be outstripping supply, in that I think we'd have a lot more people playing if more facilities existed. Is there any kind of plan, daunting as it is, to help get more curling clubs built?
There are a number of plans to get more curling clubs going right now. As far as actual building, I think that's a little further into the future because of the cost. So the biggest opportunity for us in growth here in the U.S. is in the arenas, existing ice arenas, and there is a tremendous amount of interest in that, to the extent that there's a shortage of rocks, which we're addressing right now. But I think there are 14 new curling clubs based in arenas since Torino.
Has there ever been a club that started in an arena go on to get a facility?
Yes. The most recent success is Potomac Curling Club.
Potomac was in an arena, and they did curl at a Chesapeake, I guess, too, right?
I'm not so sure about Chesapeake, but I know they were at the Ice Gardens there and some other arenas for about 30 years before finally developing their own. They're one of the models we use now when we talk to other clubs that are interested in going from arena ice to, their own dedicated facility. But it's kind of a long process and obviously capital intensive.
Yeah, it's such a tough nut to crack. I wish, I wish there was a way that someone could turn it into a profitable thing like bowling alleys, so that people would find a way to make money from a curling club. But it is a real challenge. Potomac has a great facility, but like you say, that's a 30-year process.
One of the things I've mentioned to some of the clubs, and this isn't tried or proven or anything, but if communities are saying they have a lack of skating ice, for instance, maybe a curling club could build their own dedicated facility plus an additional pad for skating ice and make money off of that.
Right, and that seems to be a bit of the model that I guess Nutmeg up in Bridgeport did.
There you go. I haven't been there yet, but I know they're open now, and hopefully that will help their business.
Back to sort of USCA broad strokes. In September of '04, you guys drafted a very comprehensive strategic plan, which I think is really good. But priority number one is grow the sport through competitive excellence. Now, I'm a guy who's an ardent supporter of competitive curling. This whole show is about talking to competitive curlers and giving them more exposure. But do you ever worry that this effort could result in a lot of focus on, say, the top 2 or 3 teams and leave a vacuum below them as teams that could perhaps develop further feel a bit overmatched? So in other words, how do you balance building those top 3 or 4 teams, building them to do well in international events without discouraging the group that's one cut below?
That's a great challenge, Dean, and I would guess not just for the U.S. as well, but as you may know, we are funded primarily by the U.S. Olympic Committee for our competitive athletes. So the greatest amount of funding for any of the teams out there is going to come, outside of our sources, and that amount varies year by year. Like this year now, immediately after an Olympics, it typically would be a little less than in the year or 2 prior to the Olympics. So in this 2006-07 season, we're able to spread the money around to more teams and try to create incentives for more teams to develop and to get out there and play in the tough bonspiels and travel and do what it takes to really dedicate themselves. And as we go toward 2009, 2010, you're going to see that funding more funneled toward just a few of the top medal hopefuls. That's kind of the reality of working with the U.S. Olympic Committee.
So as you get closer, you narrow it down a bit.
Right. You need to put the greatest amount of resources into the success of the team that's going to represent you in the next games in Vancouver.
Sure.
And we've had these planning discussions going on already since May with the U.S. Olympic Committee and looking at the 4 and 5 years out. That's kind of the strategy we've adopted.
You're touching on that. The USCA has reworked the men's and women's nationals this year, and I, for one, think you've made some good changes. I think, now correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the nationals will now include the defending champions, 6 teams reaching through qualifying rounds, and then the 3 teams with the most ASHAM World Curling Tour points. First of all, do I have that all right, correct? And second, are you going to have the WCT points leaders listed somewhere?
Well, you caught me without some of the documents in front of me, and so I'll go off the top of my head, but there's no direct buy into the finals.
Okay.
So into the qualifying round and then to the challenge round, those teams that you mentioned do have, they get not a buy-in, but they get a guarantee in.
Into the challenge round.
Into the, yeah.
Okay.
So if they haven't qualified already by, whatever reasons, winning a regional of that sort, they're going to get a chance to have a last kick at the can there.
Which is the model for challenge rounds elsewhere, so.
Right, and the WCT points will be posted. I'm not sure the timing of that, but I know that in past practice we have been listing that as, here's what the scale is, or here's where whoever falls. Ed Lukowicz is probably in charge of that right now, so.
Hey, I like the idea of giving spots to teams that commit to playing on the ASHAM World Curling Tour. I'm a big supporter of it. But has there been any thought given to giving some points to teams for the results in certain regional tour events based on the strength of field in those fields? For instance, I think there are U.S. teams that could benefit from playing on, say, the Manitoba Curling Tour, or teams out east that could benefit from the Ontario Curling Tour. Particularly those teams I talked about earlier, the ones that might just be one notch below the top 2 or 3 teams.
We do have that built in. Actually, there's what we call the sub tour,
mm-hmm.
and if you've looked at our the team funding selection process, you've probably gotten as confused as anybody looking at that, trying to figure it out. But it addresses like you've got to play so many teams or so many events in Canada, X of which have to be on the World Curling Tour, and you can play some on the sub tour, which identifies some of those events you just mentioned, the regional events, and you get maybe half as many credits for playing in those events toward your overall strength of schedule. So it's kind of starting to sound like a bowl championship series thing here, but
I like it. To be honest, what you just outlined, makes sense to me. My research was a little shoddy. I didn't get through it like you said, but I thought I'd have you explain it rather than me try to figure it out.
Yeah, the whole premise is to force the teams that are really going to dedicate themselves to go up and play in events that they stand a good chance in, getting beat up in, but to pick those events versus what may be considered one of the better U.S. cash spiels, yet without the strength of field that you're going to find in Canada.
That's good thinking. I think you're making good decisions there.
Not just me, that's for sure. This is our athletes advisory committee, and of course the teams are involved in the elite programs committee. So I'm kind of the outsider on that.
All right, well, good save on that. So you give credit where credit's due. Hey, the Corbell Elite Curling Challenge is this American Thanksgiving weekend. Did this idea come from NBC or from you guys?
It was originally pitched to us by NBC. I was back in Turin for the Paralympics when I got a call from our main programming contact there. We said, hey, I'll give you 2 hours on Thanksgiving weekend, Sunday. Can you do it? And of course we say, sure, not knowing we have any money for it, which we typically don't. But it developed from there, and we decided to go with their blessing, men versus women format, and a straight traditional curling game, so 8 ends, so that we can show as much of every end as possible. And that's at NBC's call, because some say, why don't you do more like a skins format?
No, good. The trouble with skins in this country is then it just confuses people.
Exactly. We're still trying to get people to understand the regular curling game, and that's NBC's show during the Olympics, so that's where their drive is going to be.
Hey, how are Dan Jansen and Peekaboo Street are going to be on it? It sounds like, are they going to be playing or what?
It's kind of up in the air how much involvement they're going to have. They're considered the fifth players at this point. Pete Fenson said, well, let's just have Dan play an whole end, bring him in, let him play. So that'll kind of happen as we shoot up there, and we'll see what goes on. But I foresee having Dan and Peekaboo have a shootout to start the game to see who gets hammered in the first end. They'll probably come and talk to the teams between ends, or fourth end break if we're doing 8 ends, and just ask them a lot of the questions that people at home might be asking them, like, what the heck did you just do that for? How you feeling? And what are you going to do to save this end? That sort of thing.
I like the idea of having them. I'd like to see them, Pete's idea of having them play one end. I'd like to see them do that with no practice, so people who are watching will realize how athletic curlers really are.
Yeah, that's another part of getting world-class athletes from other sports involved.
The stupider we can make them look, the better.
Well, we need to respect the fact they may not want to look so stupid,
right.
But I think they'll be good sports about it.
Awkward, not stupid.
There you go. Just want to show that it is difficult, like you and me doing a downhill ski race.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd look awkward. Or dead, one or the other. Anyways.
Yeah.
Hey, there was recently an increase in USCA member dues. I thought it was handled pretty well with an open discussion about amounts and timing. I've been critical of how the CCA handled their last bump. But anyways, any increase makes some curlers and clubs question the value of membership in an organization like the USCA. What would you say to them?
You're always going to have that. The biggest thing when I talked with our directors and others about this, including my own curling club, was that, this is a perception versus reality thing. If you look at the factual side, our treasurer, Andy Anderson, did a good job of laying out, here's what typical dues cost in other sporting organizations in the United States, and we're falling in the bottom half of the overall price, at $25 a person. The value is really, again, going to be your perception. There's people that believe the USCA just spends all the dues money on athlete programs, which isn't true, because most of that money is coming from the U.S. Olympic Committee. And some of the money from the U.S. Olympic Committee we also are able to use for supporting grassroots programming. And one other thing just on that point is that the athletes actually are member service tools, because look at all the traffic that was driven to curling clubs in the United States by Pete Fenson's team in the Olympics.
Right, and if some clubs may not realize, too, that the U.S. has to qualify to get in the Olympics, so they have to have good showings at World Championships to get that buzz.
Correct, the 3 years prior. So I think the clubs, for the most part, the responses we got were positive. The only negative was the timing, which was a little bit out of our control because of the timing of our budget announcements. But for the most part, if we're going to grow, we've got to do it together.
Well, curlers have always been thrifty, so rate increases are always a challenge. But I think that, they certainly made sense. Gosh, the rates are still awfully low.
Correct.
Well, Rick, we end with something I call the runback. I give you a topic, and you give me your thoughts on it in 1 to 3 words.
This will be interesting.
All right. Curling apparel.
Nike competitive gear.
Is that partnership continuing? I mean, they got a lot of buzz out of the Olympics with what the guys and girls, women and men were wearing.
Yes, it is. We are looking at probably a 4-year renewal right now, and I've outfitted both Debbie and Pete's teams this year in Nike, as well as a number of our funded teams. So, and Nike wants to do some exciting things that I can't really talk about yet today, but hopefully we'll see some results here in the near future.
The 2007 calendar featuring top female curlers, including, it seems, Debbie McCormick.
Interesting to see soon, I guess.
I think it's available today, so I think you can actually go online now and buy it.
All right.
Mixed doubles curling.
Interesting concept.
Toby Keith.
Great curling potential.
Yeah, I think he's a little off the mark if he thinks he's going to be in 2010, but if he's trying, go for it, Toby.
We actually took him curling here a couple weeks ago. He was in Green Bay with the help of the Green Bay Curling Club. And Bev Schrader, our member services instructor here, and Terry Luter, the communications person, we lined it up to take Toby and his team curling in the afternoon before their concert that day. And they wanted to play at full 8 ends. We couldn't get them out of there if we wanted to, and we didn't want to. But they're serious about getting better, so we'll see.
They're enthusiastic. Hey, American beer.
American beer. I make my own.
Do you really?
Yeah.
I actually have to tell my Canadian friends that I think American beer, craft beer, is better than Canadian beer. But
yeah, I'd agree.
Anyways, and that strange curling rock-shaped bread they kept showing on the CNBC broadcast from Turin.
Hard crust.
They kept getting stranger, and I thought maybe a little more X-rated as the week went on.
I think that was up to Fred. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for your time, Rick. I appreciate it. I think you guys are moving your organization in a good direction. And hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate the support, and of course, not just from you, but everybody out there. So, all the best.
That's Rick Patzke on The Curling Show. Thanks for listening. Now here's some tasty black pudding. It goes really well with the Continental Cup and American Thanksgiving.
Every day you blend into the crowd.